Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Some of you may have been listening long enough and faithfully enough to remember that the Forever Friends segment sort of grew out of a previous segment that we did on heroes. And you'll remember in that segment on heroes that I would pick a person that I looked up to and admired and wanted to be like and spoke well of them and why that was the case. And I got to the place where I wanted to speak well of people that I looked up to and enjoyed, but maybe they were more peers than they were heroes to me. And that's how I made this particular segue. Well, now we're coming full circle because for today's Forever Friend, I've determined I want to speak about a friend whose character I so looked up to that I would want to call him a hero. Well, the gentleman I'd like to speak about today is both of these things. He has heroic qualities that I was able to see and admire, but he has been just a wonderful friend. His name is RandyWinton. And Randy, I first met Randy after I had done a phone interview with him about potentially coming to be my assistant at the old Highlands Ministries. And Randy moved with his two sons and his wife to help me with that calling. And so we worked together for some time, and he was a part of our community there, but eventually he moved back to California to help care for aging parents. And while he was there, he and his two sons created a bluegrass band and did incredibly well. And so it happened in God's good providence that I would see them from time to time because they would be performing at events that maybe I would be speaking at. And so we got to hang out together, and gosh, I just enjoyed that. Randy, and this is going to seem crazy to you, but Randy, for all of his great character, I did tell him this. I said, Randy, I love you, I respect you, and I admire you, but one of the things that I like best about you, I'm not sure I should. And that was simply this, that Randy could be really sarcastic, really dry humor, dry wit, and that just went right up my alley, but not necessarily in a good way is what I'm saying. I'm not sure that it encouraged godly character in me, but I do confess that I very much enjoyed it. It's been a long time since I've been able to see Randy, and I know that he's had some really difficult times in his life, as have I, including the relatively recent death of one of his sons. In fact, I think the last time I saw Randy was at that son's wedding that I got to participate in, but that son has since passed on. And I don't know what's going on beyond that in his life. I do know, I have confidence that in the midst of the genuine pain he and his wife must be dealing with, and his wife's a wonderful lady too, I have confidence that he's resting in the Lord. Randy has been a worship leader. He has been a musician. He has been he has had his own landscaping company. He's always been diligent and hardworking, but always fun. He's the kind of friend, this is a good description, he's the kind of friend who if you were, I don't know, driving across the country and your path was going to take you 3 hours away from where he is, he'd pick up the car and go and meet you and have lunch with you. 6 hours for one lunch. That's the kind of guy Randy is. And the kind of guy Randy was. It's one of those relationships too where you remember those times together, those fun events. I'll say this too for Randy. He was really gracious in being forgiving towards me, because one of those funny times that really wasn't that funny is we were moving the office from one place to another, and poor Randy was carrying something heavy and slipped and fell, and whatever he was carrying landed right on his lap, and it looked pretty funny, so I laughed, even though I'm sure it hurt quite a bit. Well, I want Randy to know that I'm praying for him and for his family. After he and his wife and the boys went back to California, they also adopted a couple of daughters that I know were also had some challenges that they have patiently dealt with and lovingly dealt with. So I look forward to sending this off to Randy and just letting him know that even though we haven't talked, I still continue to pray for him, that I still continue to look back with deep gratitude toward him, and that I respect and admire him. He's a good man. Now, the rest of you, go and do likewise. Find you an old friend and let them know one way or another how grateful you are to God for them and their interaction with you in your life. It's been about a week since I got sick, and it is hanging on much more than I would hope or expect. And I have found myself physically exhausted. This morning I had the opportunity to once again teach my Introduction to Ethics class at Ivy Tech Community College here in Indiana. And this afternoon I am busy about the business of recording next week's shows for my podcast. And that includes this particular segment, which is our weekly appeal segment. I mention this sickness because its existence reminds me of one of the advantages that we have to offer vis-a-vis other podcasts. And that's simply this: we're always open. 5 days a week, every week of the year, we put out 2 daily podcasts. Now, that may be more than you're interested in. That may be more than you can take in, more than you can devote your time to. But I want you to know, we're not leaving you wanting more. I want you to know, or at least I hope, I don't know what to think about that. We are trying to be faithful and diligent in maintaining the provision of what we're doing. In the midst of this illness, I would very much right now prefer to be lying in bed resting, especially after 3 hours of teaching on Zoom. But I also very much want to provide this podcast for our faithful listeners. So how can you help? Well, as always, you can pray, and you can pray for health for me and for Lisa. This is not a mild cold. It's been just really rough, a lot of coughing, keeping us up at night, etc. So please feel free to pray for us as we seek to continue to get better. Secondly, you can support the work of this ministry. I said it once, I'll say it 1,000 times. If I'm not willing to ask, why in the world would you be willing to give? Well, I am willing to ask, and I am asking. I'm asking for financial support. I can tell you that we have had exceedingly slow growth in terms of our donors over the last 6 months or so. We've gained a few, but not very many at all. And we are still hoping and desiring to be able to commit more time and more energy to this podcast. And we're essentially waiting for God to send donations sufficient to allow us to do this, to set aside other things that we're doing to try to put food on the table. That's the situation that we find ourselves in, and we're hoping that you can and will help out. You don't have to be Bill Gates in order to move the needle in a significant way. And a large number of small donors is so much more healthy and fruitful than a small number of large donors. Now, those of you who God has prospered, I'm not saying don't bother. We would love to hear from you as well. Friends, this is a simple thing. If you're blessed by this podcast, maybe not this segment, but if you're blessed overall by this podcast, if you find it helpful, if you find that it provides insight for you, if you find that it helps you grow in grace and wisdom, which is, of course, what we're trying to do, would you consider being a monthly partner with us? Like every other ministry, Dunamis Fellowship depends upon monthly partners, just like every other ministry you've ever heard of. And we're asking you to come alongside and be one of those monthly partners. You can do it easy as pie. All you have to do is go to rcsprolljr.com. You think you can remember that? rcsprolljr.com. Oh, wait while you get a pencil. No, you don't need a pencil. rcsprolljr.com. Go to that website, and right there on the homepage, there's a donate button. Click that button, and it will walk you through the whole process. Dunamis Fellowship, which is the company that produces, or the organization rather, that produces this podcast, is a tax-deductible organization that you can give to. You can write off any donations to us legally and comfortably. So we consider doing that. And as always, there's other things you can do. Tell your friends. Give a nice review of the podcast. Share it on your social media. Get the word out and help us to grow. You know, if we I don't know, if 1 out of every 100 listeners donates and we increase our listenership by 1,000, then we've just gained 10 more donors. So again, get the word out and let people know that you are enjoying this podcast and that it's being a blessing to you. And we will be so grateful. Thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your help. And God bless you. There is not just a valley, but a deep chasm that separates what we know and what we feel. King David, a soul so profoundly attuned to God's own spirit that God called him a man after his own heart, who penned that ode to peace in God's grace, Psalm 23, is also the author of multiple psalms overflowing with sorrow. The one who said he would fear no evil in the valley of the shadow of death, despaired in a dry and thirsty land, wailed over the betrayal of his dear friend, soaked his bed with tears, struggled with a disquieted spirit within him. Did David need to meditate on his own Psalm 23? Yes. It's so easy for us to fall off either side of the horse, to mix a metaphor, drive our emotional hot rods into the ditch on either side of the road. Sometimes we mistake the courage David took in knowing that God was with him in the valley of the shadow of death, as if David managed to be stoic, to keep a stiff upper lip. We confuse a steady faith with emotional distance, or we berate ourselves for failing to do so. On the other hand, we can also come to those places where David is laying his heart bare and justify our own lack of faith. We can enter so deeply into our hardships or our fears that we lose sight of His grace, His power, and His compassion. We can cover our distrust of the Father with the flimsy bandage of, quote, keeping it real. We can echo the children of Israel and their grumbling against the Lord with the excuse that God will just have to learn to accept our feelings. He's a big God. He can do that, certainly. Well, friends, maturity is in large part that process by which we grow in our ability not just to have our feelings match our thoughts, but to have both of them match reality. We do not allow our feelings to run amok, to seize the reins, to paint our reality. Instead, we instruct our wayward feelings of the truths of God's Word. When I am afraid, I will call myself to trust in Him. I will recall to mind the innumerable deliverances by which He has rescued me and those who have gone before me. I will meditate on His promise that He loves me and that He will never leave me nor forsake me. I will sing of His grace flowing out of the side of my Redeemer. I will hide in the shadow of the wings of these truths. He is able, and He is for me. Maturity, however, isn't something I have. It is instead something I work toward, something I mature into. It's a process, not a destination. The fiery darts of the serpent come at us from all directions. Economic uncertainty, health scares, power grabs, relational strains, devious plots, besetting sins. To enter the fray, first I must be girded with the belt of truth. I must guard my heart with the breastplate of the righteousness of Christ. Then I will walk into the valley, into the darkness, into the battle, my feet shod in the gospel of peace. Then I will follow in His steps, for the sower leads us. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.